Hey everyone, so what I've done over the last few days is I've been driving a lot of laps with the Group 3 cars on Gran Turismo 7, and I've discovered there are a lot of Group 3 cars in Gran Turismo 7, 44 of them. And my goal here was to try work out which was the fastest car to drive around Spa on the BOP setups. It did take a wee bit of thinking and testing to get this as close as I have, because on the time trial mode you can't select the BOP setups as far as I'm aware. I couldn't find it anywhere. So I had to run a custom race and just do a single lap with the BOP setups on to try and get as close as I could. And also the wind speed and direction isn't always exactly the same, so I had to restart the sessions a bunch of times to get the wind speeds and directions as accurate as I could. But what I think I've got here is a fairly good general idea of what the cars are capable of at Spa on Gran Turismo 7. So basically what I did is start the race, drive a nice clean fast lap, and take the time and the fuel reading at the end of that lap. Fuel readings aren't 100% accurate, but they're fairly close. They're never going to be 100% accurate because they always jump up and down a few points here and there, but they're quite close. And I think the lap times show a pretty good representation of what the car's capabilities are like. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go through each of these Group 3 cars and just give a brief description of how that car is to drive at this track, and is it a good car to choose for racing around here. And at the moment, this list is an order of the fastest lap time to the slowest. Then after I go through the cars, we're going to look at the fuel usage in order from best to worst. And then after that, we're going to try and put them together and find what cars are technically the best ones to race around here in terms of lap time and fuel efficiency. And just a couple notes I've thought after recording all this. As you can see, I'm wearing a different shirt on a different day. I used the hard tires on all the cars. I used fuel map number 1. On the faster cars that are less fuel efficient, you can just put down the fuel map and make them a little bit more fuel efficient while still being quick. The clips that I'm going to be showing in this video are not the same laps that I recorded for this list that I have. These are more just examples of what the cars drive like. And if you do like this kind of video, then please let me know what other tracks you'd like me to do this for. And if you say the Nordschleife, you're going to probably have to wait a good few months for that, because that will take me hundreds of attempts to get good laps for the video while I'm also working on other videos as well. It'll take a long time. If you really want it, then I might work on it. It's just going to take a while. Oh, and another t-shirt change. Well, I think let's spend a moment to talk about Unleashed Driver's new sponsor, which is NZ Gaming. If you're from New Zealand and you're looking to buy anything gaming related, well then NZ Gaming's just for you. As you can see, NZ Gaming provides all kinds of gaming equipment, accessories, and more. And following this channel, I assume you're into sim racing, and NZ Gaming has plenty of sim racing equipment as well, including wheels, pedals, shifters, even flight sticks, pedals, and more. If you're really into your sim racing, you could even pick up a cheeky motion platform as well. And like I said before, NZ Gaming also sells wheelbases and wheels, some really good Thrustmaster equipment, especially if you're into Gran Turismo. These are some of the best ones you can get. And also thanks to NZ Gaming, over the next few videos I'll be able to talk about and use the Thrustmaster TG2 wheelbase and the TLCM pedals, and also the additional Thrustmaster Formula Ferrari SF1000 edition wheel. So that's exciting, coming up soon. I hope you guys will enjoy the content, and big thanks to NZ Gaming again for this awesome support. So the first car we're going to take a look at here is right at the bottom, and it's absolutely rubbish. The Peugeot VGT Group 3 car. It doesn't have a cockpit view, so that's one thing I really don't like about it. It's just slow, it's kind of too stable, and it's not got great fuel efficiency either. So yeah, I found this car to be quite understeery, especially as you're coming through Rouge and Radion here. You have to turn quite a lot to get the turn flat. It's doable, but it's just very understeery, and like I said earlier, it's a bit too stable. Coming onto the throttle, you can hammer the throttle and the thing won't do anything, it won't oversteer. It's very, very stable, and also slow at the same time. So arguably this car and the next car are pretty trash, and I wouldn't really ever go near them. Now for the next car on our list, which will be the Volkswagen GTI VGT car, which I personally think is my least favourite looking Group 3 car in the game, but it's quite reluctant to turn at low speeds. It's quite understeery, it pushes quite a lot, so you're going to brake a little bit earlier and be patient for the car to turn. It's very stable on throttle, so you're not going to have any oversteery on throttle issues. It's quite understeery in the high speed turns, like Radion, you have to turn quite a lot to get up here flat. Same with Blanchemont, you have to just be aware you're going to have to turn a bit more. And through the mid-speed turns, when you enter the turns, initially it enters with a bit of understeer, but very easily snaps into an oversteer, as you'll probably see right here as we enter the turn, probably carrying a little bit too much speed, but it kind of snaps into a little bit of a slide. As we come down the hill here, as we enter the turn, we enter with a bit of understeer, and then it snaps into an oversteer. So you just got to brake a little bit earlier and be a bit more patient with this car. And just like the other car, very slow, and its fuel efficiency isn't great. Another car I wouldn't recommend you go with. Right, so 42nd on the list is the McLaren 650S GT3. You know what, this car actually doesn't feel too bad in terms of handling. It's not that bad. It's just got a little bit of initial entry understeer in the mid-speed turns, and I guess its acceleration just isn't that great. It feels not too bad, but it's still very slow. Its fuel efficiency also isn't that bad. It's just a slow car around this track. It also handles the high-speed turns very well. You don't have to turn that much, just a steady line there, and you get through it quite well. But coming to the final chicane where it's very tight, just you might want to carry a little bit of throttle into the turns to avoid getting what I'm going to refer to a lot in this video, which is mid-engine snap. When you come into a tight hairpin without carrying any throttle input, the rear end just snaps out on you and you can't really do anything with it. So I'm going to refer to that a few times in the video. This car doesn't suffer from it too badly, but you might get a little bit of it on that final chicane if you carry a little bit too much speed into the turn or turn too aggressively. Now for the car I'm 41st on this list, which kind of surprised me, is the Renault RS01. It's really fuel efficient, but just doesn't seem to have the pace around this track. And it also suffers quite heavily from that mid-engine snap. As you'll see, as we get to the apex of the hairpin, the car just snaps out on us. So to avoid getting that mid-engine snap, you kind of got to carry a little bit of throttle into the, well, as you get through the apex, you got to pick up the throttle quite early to avoid the rear end snapping out on you at the apex of the hairpin. Otherwise, this car handles pretty good. Through the mid-speed and the high-speed turns, it's got a lot of grip. Through Radeon here, it actually gets a little bit loose if you turn too aggressively, so just be smooth with your steering inputs if you're going to drive this car. But it is kind of slow around this track. Its fuel efficiency is amazing. It's probably equal best with the Porsche 911. But I think it's just a bit too slow on this track to be too competitive. And with the mid-speed and high-speed corner entries, it is a little bit floaty. It's controllable, but floaty. Just got to be prepared to carry a little bit of throttle on the entrance to those turns as well. It's a little bit more predictable. The hairpins are the ones that are going to get you, so just be a little bit more cautious on the hairpins. We'll have a look at this corner right here. The car floats a little bit into the turn, just got to carry a little bit of throttle to control that, and you should be fine. So we're just going to take another look at some mid-engine snap coming into the final chicane. As we hit the apex, the rear end is going to snap out, can't catch it, and that's it. So now we're moving up to the less trashy cars, but still the slower cars on this list. Number 40 being the Mazda Atenza Group 3 car. It could have been maybe just a couple tenths quicker, but overall still a very slow car. Very stable, it moves a little bit on throttle, but on turn entry on pretty much all the turns, it's quite understeery. Going through Rouge Radeon here, it actually turns quite nicely. But everywhere else on turn entry, it's quite understeery, so you have to brake a little earlier, just be a little bit more patient for turn in. Otherwise, very stable, no snappiness. Doesn't have the greatest straight line speed, and all these things is why it's sitting this low on the list. 39th car on this list would be the GT500 Toyota Supra. It's actually not that bad handling, but it is a bit understeery on the turn entry of mid-speed turns, and also through Radeon Rouge just there, it's a little bit more understeery, got to turn a bit more. Also has no movement on throttle, very understeery, and it just doesn't feel that punchy coming out of the turns. It's got a decent straight line speed overall, just doesn't feel that great coming out of the turns, just a bit reluctant overall. This car on my tests did a 218.4, which is still quite slow, and it didn't have the greatest fuel efficiency either. In 38th with a 2-minute 18.2, we step into the Honda NSX Group 3 car, which actually isn't too bad on the hairpins. I thought it would have a bit of a mid-engine snap, but it's quite stable on turn entry mostly. However, when we get to the mid and high speed turns, it gets quite loose on turn entry, and you just got to carry a little bit of throttle to control the car through those turns. And also has a bit of a weird head movement when you go into Radeon. The camera just swings to the left there. It's the only car it does that in, so that was a little bit off-putting when you're in cockpit view. Otherwise, yeah, it's quite a difficult car to drive, but when you get it together, it's still not that quick around here, and its fuel efficiency is pretty good, but I don't think its pace makes up for it. So coming down here to Puon, we're going to take a look at the turn entry. Just the way the car kind of floats, you've got to correct its oversteer, otherwise you're going to slide and spin around. And you also got to brake a little bit earlier on this car, because it doesn't seem to have the greatest brakes. I broke a little bit late there. Well, I actually broke where I normally would in these kind of cars, and I way overshot the corner and snapped into a bit of an oversteer there as well. So just brake a little bit earlier. And coming through Blanchemont, the car is actually a little bit unstable. I'm taking it not too bad, a little bit of the inside curve there, but it got the car quite sideways. In most cars that wouldn't happen, so if you drive this car, just be aware that might happen to you. 37th on the list with another 218.2 would be the GT500 Nissan GTR. Overall, decent handling car, quite understeering the high-speed turns like Radeon and Rouge. You've got to turn a little bit earlier, turn a little bit more. And in these mid-speed, lower speed turns, it's also a little bit reluctant to turn in. Otherwise, not too bad, quite quick in the straight line, coming out of the corners as well. And yeah, we're just going to take a look coming down to Pujon again. Down here, we'll see the car's just a wee bit reluctant to bite and turn into the apex. So just brake a little earlier if you're going to use this car. Fuel efficiency isn't the best, but it's not the worst either. 36th with another 218.2 is the Nissan GTR Nismo GT3 car. Also a very understeery car, which is a common theme with most of the front engine cars. Isn't the quickest on the straights, not too bad. Actually not too bad on the straights, but very understeery on the turn entry with most of the mid-speed turns. It's quite punchy on throttle though, it does move a little bit if you stab the throttle. But yeah, if we look just here, we'll see how the front end just struggles to bite and hold the inside line there, drifts out quite wide. But a very stable car though, just not the quickest. And also doesn't have too bad fuel efficiency, it's one of the better ones out there. Now 35th, we've got the Mitsubishi Evolution Final Group 3 car. 218.1 is the time I've got on the list here, but it's definitely capable of maybe a few tenths quicker to break into the 17s. So this car's actually not too bad. It handles really well overall, it's very stable. It's got a bit more front end bite than some of the other front engine cars that I pointed out so far have had. It's actually really good overall. It has a little bit of movement on throttle if you stab the throttle too hard. So it handles really good, but not good enough to push it further up this list. And for fuel efficiency, it's again not the best, not the worst, somewhere around the middle. So in 34th, we have the Peugeot RCZ Group 3 car. This car tends to dominate a lot of tracks, but here at Spa, it doesn't seem to quite have it. The fuel efficiency is not too bad, it's on the better side, but doesn't quite have the pace, 218.0. It's actually a little bit understeery going through Raidillon here. The front of the car actually kind of lifts up if you get it wrong, and I actually, in that particular example, got a penalty, a half a second slowdown penalty on the weak slowdown system. There you go, you can see it there. And yeah, it's not the quickest in the straights, but it has really good turn in. It bites really well, and it does have a little bit of floatiness on turn entry at times. It's easy to control with this car though. And in the final chicane, it gets a little bit of mid-engine snap, but it's not too aggressive. Not a bad car overall, just a little bit on the slower side. We'll just have a quick look coming to the final chicane. You'll see the car wants to sort of lurch to the right as we hit the apex there, and then as we go to the left, it does a similar thing. It swings, but it's easy enough to catch with this car. 33rd, we have the Toyota Gazoo Racing Super Racing Concept Group 3 car with another 218 flat. With kind of average fuel usage, it's a little on the worst side. Overall, quite a quick car on the straights, but it's very reluctant to turn in on a lot of the turns, quite understeery, and also very stable on throttle, doesn't really move around that much on throttle. I think it makes a lot of its time up on the straights and acceleration, and you do have to brake a little earlier for some of the turns, especially that final chicane, because if you don't, you overshoot the corner like I'll show in a second. Oh, and just before we get to that final turn, it's, yeah, even under Sterry and Blanchimont, the high-speed turn, if you go this wide, you'll get a slowdown penalty, so you might have to turn just a little bit earlier there, turn a little bit more. And as we come to the final turn, we have to brake a little bit earlier as well, because as you see, completely missing the turn, making that final turn even tighter for ourselves, getting our throttle a little bit too early, going wide again. So yeah, just a bit more of an understeery car and will require a little bit more patience. It's quite quick on the straights though. 32nd, the Alfa Romeo 4C Group 3 car. This is another mid-engine car that suffers quite heavily with that mid-engine snap. As you'll see as we enter the hairpin apex, the rear just snaps on us. So this car did a 218 flat again with decent fuel efficiency, but coming to that first corner to again avoid that mid-engine snap, we're going to carry a little bit of throttle towards that apex, picking up the throttle quite early just to avoid the car snapping out on us on the apex of the hairpin. And we'll probably do the same thing in the final chicane, but coming up to Rouge, you've got to get this quite perfect because the car can become a bit of a handful if you get it wrong. As you can see, we understeer a little bit up here, cutting across in the car, and it starts bouncing all over the place, becoming uncontrollable. Just make sure you turn a little bit more for this car in Rouge and Raidillon. So again, for those mid-speed and hairpin turns, carry a little bit of throttle into them to avoid that rear end snapping out on you. And the mid-speed turns is a little bit more controllable, like those other cars I've said before. It's just those hairpins that are going to get you. Out of all of these cars, this is one of the ones I had the worst time with on this track. So if you struggle with driving difficult cars, I'd highly recommend to stay away from this one. So now we're into the 217s. We're getting towards the middle sort of category of the cars on this list, and this is the first one on this list with a 217.9. It could be a couple tenths quicker if I'm going to be honest. It's a really good car. To be honest, might be my favorite handling car out of this entire list. Is the Subaru BRZ GT300 car, the new one that they just put into the game. It's got really good front end. It turns really well in all the turns, while also being very stable pretty much everywhere. It's a very drivable car, very beginner friendly, very quick. I think it's overall a good car to drive with decent fuel efficiency. It's on the better side, not the best. I think if you really get the hang of this car, this might just be a very viable car to use. Keep in mind this is only 31st on the list, so there's still a good 30 cars ahead of us still to come. So good car, but ain't quite up there with the top ones. Now we jump from a 17.9 to a 217.5, and from this car and the next 15 cars or so, they're all very close, and I would rate them all very equally. They're very well balanced this next about 15 cars or so. So starting from this one, which was on the lower end, the Lexus RCF GT3 prototype. There's two Lexus RCF Group 3 cars in Gran Turismo 7, but the prototype one seems to be a little bit slower. They have different gear ratios. They're a little bit different overall. This one's got a different steering wheel. It moves a little bit on throttle, so you can use the throttle to rotate the car a little bit. It's a little understeery in the mid-speed corners, and the high speed is not too bad. It's a little bit more reluctant in the hairpins as well. Its top speed's also not that bad, not the best, not the worst. Kind of a very average car, and good if you can make the most of it. The best thing about this car is its fuel usage. It's one of the best on fuel efficiency. It's probably ranked 3 or 4 out of the list that I have, so we'll take another look at that a bit later on. So the 29th car we have on the list will be the BMW M3 GT car. I have very similar comments to this car that I had of the Lexus that we just looked at. Honestly, not too much different. They both move quite a bit on throttle. You can use the throttle to rotate them a little bit. They're a little bit reluctant on turn in, but you brake a little bit earlier and then you can remove that problem. Very stable cars, not too difficult to drive while also being pretty quick. This car is just slightly less fuel efficient than their Lexus was, by about maybe a lap's less worth of fuel or so. Otherwise, pretty similar cars. 28th with another 217.5 is the McLaren F1 GTR, but it has a couple issues. It suffers quite heavily with that mid-engine snap problem, as we're going to have a look on the first hairpin here as we get to the apex. Again, the rear just lets go if you're not carrying throttle into the turn. So the next issue with this car is a bit of a setup issue. The car's too low and you can't change setup with the BOP system, so it's a bit messed up. As you see, if we come into Rouge and we turn to radio on, the steering wheel sticks and then it suddenly turns. With Gran Turismo 7, if the front of your car's too low and your front wheels are underneath the fenders, if you turn while the wheels are under the fenders and they make contact with them, your wheels aren't going to turn. And that's simulated in Gran Turismo 7. So with whatever the BOP setup is on the McLaren, it sucks because you can't get through Radeon properly because this issue happens. And just to have a closer look, if we zoom up, we get that exact problem right here. So the wheels are stuck right up under the front fenders and they can't turn. It's pretty much as simple as that. And I think it's kind of poor that this is a BOP setup. We can't change it, so hopefully they change this. This is a bit of a bug or a problem at the moment, so this needs to be worked on. Basically, I just went through and tried to get an example for you guys. I made about 10 attempts, but this is the best I could get. You just have to turn earlier, and you might have to lift it a little bit to make the turn, but you just got to turn early right here and hope the car's going to unload enough for you to grip, or you just enter it a little bit slower. I still completely missed the apex and lost a ton of time through there. On my actual lap that I recorded for my list, it was a lot better. I got it through there quite smoothly. It's just very difficult. Otherwise, the car's actually probably one of the more fun cars to drive. On the slower corners, it's got a bit more of like an entry slide that you can control with the throttle. And same with the mid sort of speed turns, but it doesn't have a snap as such when you enter these mid-speed turns. When you come into the corner entry, it's quite a smooth, stable entry, so it's quite controllable. When you enter Pujon, you might get a little bit of a slide, but again, it's fairly easy to control with a bit of throttle input just to stabilize it, and you get your foot down again. Also, when you get the car in a little bit of a slide, you can also use the throttle to rotate this car as well a little bit. Like right here, I get a bit of a slide on, hammer the throttle just to push it around, and here again, you'll see I use the throttle to just rotate the car around the corner a little bit more. It actually works really nicely in this car. And for fuel efficiency, it's actually one of the better cars, probably within the top 10. The 27th on the list, we have the Citroën GT by Citroën race car, Group 3 car. Another 217.5, not too quick on the straights, and it has very good mid-corner grip and grip in general, but the rear end is quite loose, so when you enter turns like here, the rear is very quick to escape from you, so you've got to be ready to correct a lot of oversteer. And it is quite understeery on throttle, so you get into that slide and you start accelerating and then it understeers, so it's a bit of a weird balance. If you can drive that kind of car, then sure, go for it, because it does have quite a lot of grip and it can do decent times. And just on top of that, it's got my least favorite interior design. It's just way over the top, and I think that glass panel thingy on the front's just too much, and you can't see much out of this car if you run in cockpit view. It's very small window space, like the field of view really doesn't help with that, and that was just a mistake I made, by the way, not the car's fault. Also, just a note on that Citroen, it's actually one of the worst on fuel. I can't remember if I said if it was good or not. It was one of the worst on fuel. But anyway, on to the Huracan, which is number 26, also doing 217.5. This one's pretty good on fuel, on the better side, probably just outside the top 10, but close to it. And its handling is more for advanced drivers with good car control. It does rotate a little bit on corner entry, gets a bit slidey, so you want to control that with your throttle. But I think it does it in a really nice way that's very controllable and fast. It's a quick car, very comfortable for me personally to drive. Does slide a bit though. Not the quickest in a straight line, but overall a pretty good car, sort of in the mid-range on the better side of it. And it doesn't really suffer with that mid-engine snap. Maybe a little bit in the final chicane, just be a little bit cautious there, but compared to some of those other snappy ones, this one's a bit more tame. Now we take a step forward to the 2015 Audi R8 LMS, which is pretty much the same as the Lamborghini that we just showed. Handles almost identically, but overall it's just slightly more stable than the Lambo was. It's also not that quick in the straight line, pretty much average there, but it's also not as fuel efficient as the Lambo was for whatever reason, because they have the same engine. It's obviously set up just slightly different. But overall, similar to the Lambo, just a little bit more stable. And again, doesn't have much of a mid-engine snap. It might have a little bit of that in the final chicane, so just be a bit careful there. Now on 24th, we have the Dodge Viper, stepping down to 217.4 seconds now. They're all very close. Also doesn't have the greatest fuel efficiency. It's a little bit less than most of them, probably in the bottom 20. Not the quickest in a straight line either, but has really good handling. It's also probably the looser front engine car out of the lot. In turn entry, the rear end steps out a little bit compared to most of the other front engine cars. Got great turn in for a front engine car through the mid turn. Overall, decent handling car, good out the corners, and we're just about halfway through the list now. 23rd on the list, we have the Subaru WX Group 3 car. It's quite understeery at high speed, so just make sure you don't turn too late for Radeon there. And also through the mid-speed turns, you might have to brake a little earlier. This thing's quite quick on the straights, so yeah, you will have to brake just a little bit earlier and be a bit more patient for those mid-speed turns. It's very stable on throttle though, mostly just another comfortable front engine car that's also really quick. And all right on fuel, it's about an average car on fuel in terms of fuel efficiency. As you can see, it just pushes very far into the corner there and you just have to wait for it to pull back. Otherwise, a very decent car, which also did a 217.4, and the next couple cars will also be 217.4. The BMW Z4 GT3, which is in 20 seconds, so we're halfway through the list now. The BMW, well, Z4, it's quite understeery overall, another very stable car, but also still enough grip to be quick because it doesn't have the best straight line speed. A nice comfy car to drive if you struggle with difficult mid-engine cars. Its fuel efficiency isn't the best, it's probably an average car in terms of fuel efficiency, but quite a nice, easy car to drive. And for both the Rouge Radeon and Blanchimont, just make sure you turn early enough and you turn enough, otherwise you'll understeer off the track and give yourself a time penalty. This time was pretty much perfect, just don't go too wide there. In 21st, the Ferrari 458 Italia GT3 is actually not too bad for a mid-engine car. When I came to this thing, I was expecting this to be snapping like crazy, but it wasn't too bad. It was probably about midway between those super snappy mid-engine cars we were looking at earlier and the Lambo and the Audi. It's probably in between in terms of snappiness. It rotates a little bit on the mid-speed turn entry, like these ones. It rotates a little bit and you can use the throttle to control that, like I said before. It's not that quick in the straights, so yeah, it does have good mid-corner grip. Just got to make the most of it and control it. Wouldn't exactly recommend the car to beginners, but it's a good car if you know your car control. It's also a very fuel efficient car. It's probably within the top 10. We'll look at that a little bit later on. This car being the first one into the 217.3s. For car number 20 on the list, we have the Mercedes SLS AMG GT3. I don't have a whole lot to say about it because it's just a very average feeling car, yet it's pretty quick. It's most similar to the Z4, but less understeery overall, and that's probably why it's slightly faster. Overall, just a very dull car to drive, if that makes sense. It doesn't move around all that much. It just does what you want to do when you want to do it, and that's why it's a good car, and that's why it's on the faster side of this list. So this one also does a 217.3 while not being the most efficient on fuel, around average. Number 19 on the list, the Aston Martin V12 Vantage GT3, also doing a 217.3, having a little bit better fuel efficiency than that Mercedes we just saw, but also having very similar driving characteristics to that Mercedes, but having a little bit more turning capability than that Mercedes, while also being a little bit slower in the straights. Otherwise, very similar. Number 18, the Toyota FT1 VGT Group 3 car. Similar to the cars before, very good handling, very stable, very fast, but also arguably even better turning capabilities than the previous two, and also has a slightly better top speed. This in my test did a 217.3, but I think it should have been a couple of tenths higher than that. In my first run, I did mid 216s, but that was before I realized the wind was changing in every session, so the wind was probably helping it go faster. So in my more accurate test, it was somewhere closer to, well, it was a 217.3, could have been close to 217 flat. Also good fuel efficiency, the same as the Aston Martin pretty much. 17th on the list would be the Ford GT LM Spec 2 test car. Very similar to the other Ford GT, which will be next, but this car also did a 217.3. Not very good on fuel, if I'm going to be honest. The feeling of the car, I'm going to compare it to the Ferrari. It's most similar to that one, but being just a little bit more snappy than that. Mostly quite a good car to drive, to be honest. It handles very well, it's got great cornering grip, it's got decent top speed, but on the hairpins it can be a bit snappy with that mid-engine snap, which we'll take a look at when we get to the end of the straight here. Right, coming into the turn, just watch how the car behaves on the apex. It's that nasty snap, and then the same here on the left. Honestly, to avoid that, carry a little bit less speed into the turn and avoid hitting that bump on that final turn. Next we look at the other Ford GT, the race car spec version of it. I just ran some testing to compare the two, and I found that this one's a little bit more stable than the other one, and it's actually got a different engine, which I just noticed right now, and that's probably why this one's a little bit more fuel efficient than the other one. It's still pretty bad on fuel though. I'd compare the driving of this car to the Ferrari. It's very similar to that. It's not too snappy, but if it's going to have any issues, it'll be in that final chicane with the tight turns. Otherwise, very nice mid-engine car to drive. Again, doing a 217.3. And the next car being the other Ford GT, the more modern Ford GT LM Group 3 car. This one did a 217.1. This one I have mixed feelings on. It's a very strange car to drive. It's very difficult, so if you struggle with difficult cars to drive, stay well away from this one. It's very strange, because I found it in the first hairpin, the first corner, it was very understeery, it didn't want to turn, and then it just snaps. So this car does have a big tendency to have that mid-engine snap, followed after a very heavy understeer. It's very weird, because even entering these mid-speed turns, it has a little bit of understeer, and then it's followed with a snap. So you just got to enter the corners a little slower, and just be ready for the car to swing out on you. Again, like the other mid-engine cars, just carry a little bit of throttle into the turn when your car starts getting sideways to control it. You can get the most out of it. It is a very quick car, but it's also not very fuel efficient. I don't know, between this thing and the Alpha, we're the worst in terms of drivability. They just haven't been that nice to drive, so I recommend to keep away from these ones. Number 14, we have the BMW M6 Sprint model. There's another M6, which is the endurance model, and they're very similar, and they also do very similar lap times. But this one being the Sprint model, 217.1. From here to the end, all the lap times are getting quite similar again. Fuel efficiency on this car isn't the best, and I think that'll also be a common theme for the rest of the video. The faster cars aren't all that fuel efficient, but there are some standouts. This car, mostly a very good handling front engine car, has good front end grip, but it does have a tendency to kick out on the rear end on throttle. This is one of the only cars, this one and the Lexus I think, are the only ones to really swing around with if you punch the throttle too hard, too early. Otherwise very stable and easy front engine car to drive, while also being quick. Now we're on to the other Lexus, the Lexus RCF GT3, the non-prototype one. Feels like a while since we mentioned the other one, but the difference between the two in terms of the lap times I did is only about 0.4 of a second. This one definitely seemed a little bit faster though, but it also has a similar feel to the other one. It moves a bit on the throttle, so just be aware you got to be a bit more gradual with your throttle inputs, otherwise you'll kick the rear out. Otherwise, again, a nice handling front engine car. And the fuel efficiency of this thing is one of the best. I think it might be the second best or close to it. We're getting quite high up there. There's only one car in front of this one that does better fuel than this. So definitely a good option. Number 12, we have this Genesis X Group 3 car. I'm running out of things to say about these front engine cars. They're all the same but different. If I'm going to compare this to something, I'll compare it to the Bentley GT3 and ACC or something like that, because it's a similar car and it looks the same, I guess. It's a good handling car. It moves a little bit on throttle if you hit it too hard, so just be aware of that. Otherwise, it's got great front end grip, and it's not the fastest in the straights, but still very good handling car. It's quite similar to the BMW, I think. This one does a 217.0 and doesn't have the greatest fuel efficiency, unfortunately. Let's take a look at the next car. Now for the most fuel efficient car, in number 11 we have the Porsche 911 RSR, and it did a time of a 217 flat while being the most fuel efficient car. So this thing would probably quite easily be the best choice for this track. If you're saving so much more fuel than the other cars while being this quick, I can see it being a very easy choice if you're looking to be competitive around here. It's also not that bad handling. It doesn't snap very much. It only becomes an issue when you get to that final chicane again. It gets that mid-engine snap if you turn too tight or carry too much speed into the turn, so just be aware there. Carry a little bit of throttle into those turns. And for the mid-speed turns, it's not too bad, and it is quite understeery on throttle, so just be a little bit more patient before getting on throttle. You don't want to understeer off the track. Not the fastest in a straight line, but overall does a really good lap time. So we finally reached the top 10, and number 10 will be the Hyundai Genesis Group 3 car. This thing is also one of my favorite front engine cars to drive. It just does what you want to do all the time, and you can use the throttle a little bit to rotate the car. It's not excessive like maybe the BMW or the Lexus, but it's just enough to help rotate around the corner. It also, it does a 216.9, reasonably fuel efficient, not quite there at the top, but still up there. And just, yeah, I really love the way this thing drives. It's a great car. Probably a car I would recommend if you struggle with the more difficult mid-engine cars. In number 9, we have the Aston Martin DBR9 GT1 Group 3 car. It handles fairly similar to the other Aston Martin, but it seems a little bit more lively on the rear, on the throttle. Nowhere near as much as the BMW or the Lexus, but it still moves around a wee bit, which can be quite helpful. You can use it to rotate the car out of some of the turns, which I use quite frequently throughout the lap. Like right there. It probably shares a lot of the comments I've said about most of the other front engine cars. Its fuel efficiency is actually pretty good. Not the best, but still up there. Just a great car. Not much else to say. Now for number 8, which is the other BMW M6 model, and that's the Endurance model. And I don't have much to say about it because it's basically exactly the same as the Sprint model. I just happened to go about 0.2 of a second quicker on the lap I did with this one compared to the Sprint one. Their fuel efficiency is also just about identical. Now on to number 7, which is the Mazda RX Vision Concept Group 3 car. It's kind of similar to the Viper because if you throw it in a little hard, it can be loose on turn entry, but it's also stable if you drive it right. And I think I said earlier that only a couple cars rotate on throttle. Well, that's definitely wrong. You can rotate most of these front engine cars on throttle, which is really useful to help get some extra time out of the lap. This car's fuel efficiency is quite good, not the best, but it's definitely above average. Another nice to drive front engine car. Number 6 is probably the most comfortable front engine car while being fast. There's still faster front engine cars to come, but they're a little less stable than this one. So this would probably, the fuel usage on this car is terrible, but if your race is short, this would probably be the car for me to recommend you if you struggle with the more difficult cars to drive. This is quite a comfortable and quick car, so a strong recommendation to you if the race is a bit shorter, because it is not great on fuel. In fact, I think it's the worst car on fuel, so just keep that in mind if you're going to do a longer race. There's not too much to say about it. It doesn't really have any oversteer, and it doesn't understeer that much either. Just a nice, comfortable car to drive. Now onto the top 5, we're going to take a look at the Audi R8 LMS Evo. The car in my run did a 216.7, and it's the fastest mid-engine car on my list. It feels kind of similar to the previous R8, the older Gen 1, but obviously it's a bit faster, and it's quite understeery on throttle, but its turn-in and mid-corner grip's pretty good. You just got to control the turn-in oversteer with your throttle inputs, like the other mid-engine cars. It doesn't have a lot of mid-engine snap like the other ones do, but again, like I said in the other ones, be careful in the final chicane where the corners are really tight. The car isn't super fuel efficient, so it might not be the best choice for longer races, but still a quick and fun car to drive. So now we're into the top 4, and each of the top 4 cars that I've got on my list here all did 216.6 on their lap time. This being the Jaguar, not the greatest fuel efficiency unfortunately, but still really quick. It drives quite similar to that Aston Martin DBR9, not too much different from that, and it's quite quick. Not too much else to say. Oh, I should also probably add that the thing is quite understeery at high speed, so we're coming through Rayon. You have to turn quite a lot, turn quite early. It's only just going to make it through there flat. Yeah, so the same thing with Blanchemont here. You can only really just get it flat. This time I didn't get it right and went wide, and I actually picked up a penalty from that. So yeah, just be a little bit careful with that if you're going to use this car. The next car in the 216.6s will be the Corvette Group 3 car. Probably on the worst side. It might be the second or third worst car on fuel, so wouldn't use this car for long races as such. You probably end up doing more pit stops, but still really quick and quite a comfy car to drive. Its high speed grip's a little bit better than that Jag we just looked at. It seems to go through Erosion Rayon a little bit easier, but still is a little bit on edge through Blanchemont. Just make sure you're turning early enough. Otherwise it handles fairly similar to what the Jag does. Number 2 on the list will be the Ford Mustang Group 3 car. It's actually really stable. It only moves just a little bit on throttle, otherwise it's pretty planted. Very quick in the straights as well. Does great lap times. Well, again, 216.6. Nah, still not great on fuel. Better than the Corvette was, but still not great. And that's why it's in number 2, because number 1's a little bit better on fuel. And at the top of our list, we have the Mercedes AMG GT3, which I got the best time out of. Well, equal with the last 3 cars as well. But it has the best fuel efficiency out of the previous few cars that I mentioned by quite a bit. It's actually one of the best cars in terms of fuel usage. Not right at the top, but quite close up there. And that, combined with its super quick lap time, makes it a real strong contender for doing races at this track. In terms of handling, it feels quite similar to the Mustang, to be honest. It's quite planted overall. It might have a little bit more mid-speed kind of turn grip than the Mustang did, but mostly it feels quite similar to the Mustang. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at all the cars that I've done, and I'm going to look at the fuel efficiency of them all, put them in an order from best to worst. Then I'm going to take that list and combine it with the lap times and try work out which are the better cars overall. Now to take a look at all of those results from all the Group 3 cars around Spa on paper. So what I've got here is I've got all the cars that I've just driven in order from fastest to slowest, just lap time. As you can see, I've got the lap times from fastest to slowest. The gap between the fastest time and the slowest time was 2.4 seconds, so it's quite a gap. But if you take a closer look, the gap between the first car and the 20th car is only about 0.7 of a second. And I've also shown how many laps of fuel the cars have, while also giving a percentage score on their lap times, with the fastest time being 100%, the slowest time being 0%, giving them a score based on their percentage. And we're going to do the same thing for the fuel in a second. Right, so now we've got a similar thing going on here, except this time we have the cars in order from most fuel efficient to least fuel efficient, with the Renault RS01 being the most fuel efficient car, having the most amount of laps available with the fuel it has. But unfortunately with the Renault, it just wasn't as quick, so it might be super fuel efficient, but it was a little bit slower. However, if you're doing a really long race, the Renault might actually be a good option compared to some of the faster cars with less fuel efficiency, like the Volkswagen Beetle. That thing is the worst on fuel. It's one of the fastest, but in a long race, it probably loses to the Renault. But if you saw on that previous list with the fastest times, the Porsche doing one of the quickest times is also one of the most fuel efficient, so we can already see that this is going to end up being one of the most competitive cars at this track. And again, on the right side, I've given each car a percentage score, with the highest fuel efficiency being 100% and the lowest being 0%. Now, for the last part of the video today, we're going to take a look at the final results. So here, I've taken the percentage scores I've given the cars for both their lap time and their fuel efficiency, added them up to find which ones have the best scores. So now we have all the cars in order from overall best to overall worst. On the very right side we have their overall combined percentage score, and we can see, just like I predicted, the Porsche sits at number 1. Even though it was around 10th fastest, it was the second most fuel efficient, but with those two things it puts it right up at the top. And its score is actually quite significantly better than the next best car. The next best car being the Mercedes. That thing was obviously one of the quickest. It had the quickest time equal with a few other cars, but its fuel efficiency wasn't as good as the Porsche. It was still really good actually, just not as good as the Porsche. And as we go down the list a little more, we can see some of the other cars that have stepped up from slightly slower lap times, just having more fuel efficiency. One car that I mentioned just before was the Volkswagen Beetle. That was, I think, it was well within the top 10 of the fastest lap times. Let's have a look at where that sits overall, because that thing had the worst fuel efficiency. So I'm going to look down the list, and I only see it all the way down in 34th because of its real shocking fuel efficiency. And it is absolutely worth remembering, these scores that I have on this final results list right here are only really valuable to really long races that you actually have to do pit stops in, because on very short races that fuel efficiency isn't really a problem. Then go back to that list I had with the fastest lap times and you got your best cars at the top. But for an overall endurance race kind of situation, this list right here in this order is probably the better cars that you have at the top, and the ones you kind of want to avoid are at the bottom. And of course, everybody has their own driving styles, so maybe you'll find some of the lower cars better for yourself, and you might struggle with some of the faster cars that I have on this list, which is perfectly normal. This is just a fairly good general idea to help give you a rolling start when coming into Spa trying to choose a Group 3 car for this track. I really hope they fix that issue with the McLaren F1 GTR's setup, because other than that issue, it was a really fun car to drive, and it could potentially be a little higher on this list if it wasn't for the struggles going through Rayon and Rouge. And even though it ranks 12th on this list, I would probably completely avoid it just for the fact it has that issue, because it could completely throw you off. You could go into the wall just because of that. And if I'm going to pick a favorite car out of this list, it's a really difficult choice if I'm going to be honest. I really enjoyed the way the Subaru BRZ GT300 drove. It just does everything the way you want it to. It's got one of the best fuel efficiencies out of all the cars here. It didn't have the fastest time, but that fuel efficiency made up for it for a longer race. I would have probably picked the McLaren F1 GTR if it wasn't for that setup issue, but I'm leaning towards the Mazda RX Vision GT3 concept if I'm going to be honest. The way that car drives with its really nice turn and entry, and you can rotate it just a little bit on throttle, which is really nice, while also having that awesome sound. I think that was one of my favorite cars to drive around here. And for my favorite mid-engine car, I'm probably going to choose the Audi R8 LMS Evo. That one's just a fun car to drive. Just before I finish off the video, I again want to mention simrace247.com. If you guys want to keep up to date with your sim racing news, updates, events, leagues, blog posts and more, please check them out. If you're like me and always wanting to keep up to date with your sim racing content, then be sure to check out simrace247.com. Anyway, that's the video done. It was a bit of a long one this time, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Again, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me do more tracks, or maybe let me know if there's anything you want me to do differently in these kind of videos. So a final thank you to all of you for watching. If you've gotten this far, I really appreciate you. And again, a massive thanks to NZ Gaming for the awesome support. I'll catch you guys in the next video.